do I age well? It's something I often ponder on. My name's Rosario Barreto, and I want to find out what it takes to live a healthy and happy life as we age. I'm a clinical exercise specialist, and for the past 5 years, I've worked with nearly 1,000 older adults, and as a result, have had the chance to talk to a diverse range of happy and healthy, and not so happy and healthy people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I want to know what it takes to be able to look back and confidently say, I lived an amazing life. Why not join me in this exploration on what it takes to live happily and healthily and learn how to age well? Over the past 2 to 3 months, I have not been eating very well. I have been super, super lazy, right? So it's my birthday in November, and then the lead up to Christmas. And then it's also really dark, so I like to drink lots of wine. And I'm also indulging in lots of chocolate and sweet things and processed things and different things like that. And I don't usually. I have been very consistent in the past years with things like balance and making sure I'm not overindulging. But also, there have been periods of my life where I haven't eaten chocolate, or I have only drank alcohol like occasionally. And I know that internally I feel a million times better, and I have more energy, I sleep better, I do all of those things. So I would love to know your advice on these areas. But we've just come back from Christmas, so I'm guessing a lot of people are in a very similar position, feeling a little bit lethargic, a little bit, that feeling, and want to change their health for the better, make better habits, do all of those things. But my personal opinion around that is I don't believe in fad diets. I don't believe in ridiculous detoxes where you just starve yourself for 2 weeks and anything like that. So I'd love to get some more clarity on what are best practices, how we can go about it, and really delve into what foods aren't doing us any justice.
So first of all, how hard can that be? I mean, you just asked me the whole world of questions. So essentially, probably a very good thing post Christmas. So I think everybody has put on a bit of weight. Everybody had a super fun time, and now it's really the point. And of course, New Year's resolution. So we're all joining the gym, never going, and all that. So I think there are a few things that will make it a little bit easier. So first of all, what you were saying about fad diets or anything that is incredibly drastic that might work for a week, that will not be consistent. You will not be able to stick to it. It's just not sustainable, neither for yourself mentally or physiologically. So it will not have the results that you're hoping for, losing weight, getting strong, whatever it is. So I think the first thing to keep in mind is common sense. So if you think back from your childhood, when people had common sense. So if something sounds crazy, it likely is. So that's the first thing. Another thing to keep in mind is the New Year's diets, the Daily Mail. This is what you have to do. So anything that is generic, that is general, where people say it's good for you, it's not necessarily good for you. It might be good for some. So most important thing, I think, is to listen to your own body. Whatever you do, just notice how you feel. We all know how we feel when we had alcohol. Notice how we feel and how much we hate this feeling, and to think, wait a minute, is that really something that I want to do to myself? So it's really notice how you feel, and don't listen to somebody else who just says, oh, you have to have this and you have to have that. Well, if it doesn't work for you, if it makes you feel shit, don't have it. So I think these are a few very fundamental rules, or not rules, something that you might want to consider to stick to. I think that's also a very important thing, that if somebody tells you, you have to do this and you have to do that, and you must avoid this and that, anything that is so black and white, that I would take with a grain of salt and a lot of caution, because nothing is applicable to all humans. We're all different. So that just really as an introductory note. And probably a very good start is to, if we think of clean slate, New Year, so a very good start to look at food in a slightly different way as you may have done over the last 3 months, as in you were having stuff that just tasted good and that was fun and that was nice, to actually think, okay, let's see what are the ingredients of any product. So whatever you buy in a store, and if the ingredient list is very long, more than 5 things, and especially if there's anything in there that you can't pronounce, that is something to simply not have. And even if it's oat milk, everybody loves oat milk and oh my God, Oatly. That stuff is a wonderful example of something that is horrifically produced, over manufactured. It is incredibly problematic in terms of highly inflammatory, very high GI, so triggering your blood glucose levels. So many things just to keep in mind. A few general rules: number of ingredients and what is in there, and if you can't pronounce it, don't have it. So I think that is one rule. And of course, that means that if you love Oreos, this may be now a time when you will have to say goodbye to Oreos. I'm just saying. So, but always keep yourself in mind in the sense that be kind to yourself. Don't ever totally deprive yourself of anything, because that will always come back and will come back with lots of weight and lots of feeling shit and being resentful and being unhappy. And that's not something we want. We want very small steps, but very sustainable. And to essentially, the goal is really to get to a point where you don't want to eat any shit anymore. And that's when you realize that very dark, organic, vegan chocolate is the most wonderful treat there is in the whole world. And you don't even want anything else anymore. But that's a journey to get to. So that is really, be kind to yourself and slowly get there. And I think that you were saying, oh, what's the one advice? How hard can that be? So I think, yeah, the ultra processed stuff, to really only be aware of it, and with that realize what it actually was that you kept eating and what the mechanism is, what made you feel bad, what made you possibly put on weight. Not that you have put on any weight, but it's really things like, you may have heard the expression inflammatory process, inflammation. So everybody talks about inflammatory foods. And many people just wonder, what does that mean? What is an inflammatory food? And the process is very, very simple. Foods we eat and we digest and metabolize, and in the gut, it may not be understood as this is food, this is a nutrient. It may be understood as the immune system as a foreign invader that needs to be fought. And as soon as the immune system recognizes something as a foreign invader, it will upregulate and it will fight it. And this process of fighting is a good thing if it is a foreign invader. But if it is something like a food content, gluten, whatever it is, we will have this constantly upregulated immune system, which is inflammation, chronic inflammation. And if we have a chronically inflamed gut, because we chronically constantly eat something that is not good for us, that will be directly communicated to the brain. The vagus nerve is one of the cranial nerves that connects the gut with the brain. So whatever happens in the gut happens in the brain. And so if we have an inflamed gut, we have an inflamed brain. And just as a side note, everybody knows the expression, you have a gut feeling. And that is really what happens. If something happens in the gut, it happens in the brain. And if we have an inflamed gut, that really means the absorption is not working as it should be, even if we eat highly nutritious foods. But also inflammation is really, if you look at people that look quite puffy, that look like they have been, that there is something puffy about them, that is an outer sign of chronic inflammation. Of course, everybody reacts differently, but that is an outer sign of that. And
I know that for me personally, over the last few weeks, I know that other people probably don't notice it, but I've noticed that my face and my body seems like more swollen than usual. And I know there's a hormonal element to it, definitely, but I know that it's not just down to that. And I know that it's a buildup of all of the alcohol that I've been drinking, all of the ultra processed foods. And I just want to confirm, with ultra processed and processed, what are examples of an ultra processed and just a processed food? And does that mean, for example, if you're constantly eating ultra processed foods, your inflammation is going to be higher compared to constantly eating processed foods.
Yeah. And first of all, the differentiation processed, ultra processed, it's not really something that is written in the Oxford Dictionary, I don't think, but really it's a very logical approach, if you will. Processed is really, or unprocessed, entirely unprocessed, really a carrot they take out of the ground and eat. That is unprocessed. That's just what it is. If you have wonderful organic chicken and you grill that, maybe in a little bit of coconut oil, and you just grill it, that is processed, because you're not going to eat the chicken raw. So that is processed. Processing is really anything that you do in your own kitchen, that with ingredients that you know that you have yourself. That is not just a TV dinner into the microwave, but that is the basic processing of food in the best possible way, depending on ingredients. But of course, that's the way. Ultra processed is really anything that, I think the rule is kind of anything that has more than 5 ingredients. When there are ingredients in there that you don't understand what is, that you can't pronounce. And the ultra processed ones are very much focused on the ability to store these sort of foods a long time, meaning they will contain substances that will make it non-perishable. And this is usually stuff that the body just does not understand, might treat as a foreign invader. So that's kind of the process, how ultra processed foods may lead to this chronic inflammation. The chronic inflammation side of things, and what you were describing, the puffiness, very important point there is, yes, for females or anyone, it may definitely be hormonal fluctuations. So, but food and the air we breathe, the water we drink, so nothing is ever one cause, one effect. We live in a multifactorial world. So that is very important to keep in mind, that it's not something that if we change one thing, everything's going to be fine. It makes sense to just keep an eye on everything at the same time without getting completely freaked out, but kind of thinking, what are the big ticket items? So for example, the water we drink, is that filtered? Or is that shitty tap water that smells of chlorine and that tastes of funny things and likely contains fluoride?
And you would recommend focus on filtered water?
I would focus on water is a very good thing to start with. This is something that we do every day in large amounts, but also the air we breathe. Where do we live in our own apartments? Do we have flame retardant furnishings, for example, that constantly emits fumes that are inflammatory, that are toxic? Or do we live in a in an area with a lot of traffic? Do we constantly have the exposure to exhaust fumes? It makes sense to have an air filter at home. So all these things to really think, what are the big ticket items where I live, how I live. Of course, food, nutrition is a huge thing there. Very simply, to start with, what sort of toxins can I avoid? Do I have access to organic foods? Do I have access to, or can I prepare my own foods? Can I focus on highly nutritious foods, being fruit in small amounts, because we are going to talk about sugar, and vegetables. Everybody has to make their own choices about protein intake. So humans need a lot of protein. Protein is an incredibly important building block. So I think a very good rule is 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight.
Yeah.
To really sustain one's strength. And of course, anyone who works out a lot needs to have more.
Yeah, and I was actually going to just touch on that, because that's my area of expertise in sense of like muscles and athletic development and different things like that. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the guidance, the guidance measurement. However, if you're looking at people like rugby players or weightlifters, they're the types of people who want to be massively increasing that level of protein. What's really interesting is for kind of like the day-to-day person who started going to the gym and they just start like dashing protein shakes down them, it's like, actually maybe this isn't the right thing for you right now, but eventually it will. But on the other hand, I think most of us aren't getting enough protein. I know that I definitely don't get enough protein in my diet. I track not always, but I do track my own protein intake. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I've eaten so much protein, but I'm still not reaching. I think it's like around, I should be having around like 80 to 100 grams of protein a day. And just making that is really, really challenging, because I don't want it to just be supplemented by what you're called, like what we're referring to as processed and ultra processed foods, because you can have like your protein bars and your protein shakes and different things like that. I would like to consume natural sources of protein, but adding that into your diet can be challenging from like a time and a practical point of view, and also just like what you fancy and like appetite as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think especially with age, the protein requirements go up and up and up. And exactly as you say, how hard it is to actually get enough. And of course, I'm a lot taller than you. Let's call it that. So my requirement is literally 120 grams a day, and that is just a humongous amount of protein intake. And I really start my day with a can of sardines, and that is of course protein and fat, which is a great start of to the day in terms of the metabolism to start it like that. But what is probably very important for people to, on the one hand, focus on protein intake, to make a decision about or notice how they react to different types of proteins, plant proteins versus animal protein. Eggs are an amazing source of fat and protein and nutrients. So that is definitely something to keep in mind for people that rather not eat meat or chicken. For me personally, chicken is the best thing ever in terms of getting protein, getting enough protein. And as a side note to the protein shakes, and you probably have a personal view about that as well, that all these whey protein shakes and all these things, or protein bars, contain sugar, are highly processed, and actually don't give, or the body will likely not be able to absorb all these grams of protein. So as you say, the more natural source, the better, as always. But it can turn into, especially people that do work out, that really have a huge requirement of protein. They end up, and you probably know these people that literally spend their whole day just eating chicken, which of course is, unless you are training for the world championship in bodybuilding, it's just not no fun. But at the same time, it is so important to give the body what it needs. So it's this balance and essentially a routine to get into, to really have a focus on that. There should really be protein with every meal, ideally, to take in enough. So back to your initial question. So what's the one thing? So on the one hand, so we've talked now through be aware of what you're eating, mindful, be kind to yourself. So there are a few other simple things that everybody is doing already to some extent, but to structure that a little bit more. And that is, for example, intermittent fasting. So to be focused on not just eating constantly and snacking in between, but to have a clearly defined eating window, where people have their 8 hours of feeding, 16 hours of fasting, and that is really the 16 hours of sleep plus a little bit more, ideally a few hours before sleep, not having any food, and with that, sleep quality will likely increase. And that might be a good way to re-educate oneself and move away from the pre-Christmas, just another little chocolate and just another something, to actually realize how good it feels to have a few hours here and there of not just digesting constantly.
And why is that time before bedtime or sleep time so crucial to not eat?
That is probably a very difficult question. I would say that the body, the process of digesting food, it's very energy intense, and that is something ideally that is a process that is finished before the brain calms down and the inhibitory neurotransmitters just go like, okay, sleepy time. So that is likely the process why it just makes sense to have those 3 hours before sleep, to not eat anything and to not have the hot chocolate with lots of sugar and all these things, because sugar before sleep will turn into essentially fat cells, that because there's no way to burn to burn all this excess energy. So it's really very much about being conscious about what one puts into one's body, and really just to be a bit more structured with what foods you eat and when you eat it, and just to be aware of how foods make you feel. And if something makes you feel shit, then cut it out and see what happens. Because I think from my own experience, it was very much, there are some foods that trigger me really badly in terms of my condition. And when I cut that out,
just a little side note there. Martina's got another episode coming out later on, which will talk more about you personally and how you started your journey. So we're not going to talk about your kind of condition and kind of how you got into this just today. But for those of you listening who are really interested in all of this great, valuable information, follow the podcast and then you'll be able to listen to the next one when it comes out.
Okay. Yeah, so I won't talk about it now. But so yeah, listen to yourself, make your own choices. And I think the one mantra that I always stick to is I channel my own 5-year-old. I do what I want. I do what's right for me. And that is the important thing. All these well-meaning people around you that say, but you have to eat spinach and you have to eat bread and you have to do what feels right for you. So that is really the important thing. Another big ticket item is sugar. And sugar is something that is so incredibly hard to really get under control. We all know that. And everybody always says, oh, avoid sugar. So there are really two problems. On the one hand, to only know where sugar is in a food.
So I think with sugar, I get really confused. So I'm like, okay, so like we've got like natural sugars, which you can get from fruit. And then you've obviously got like sugar that you can put in your tea. And then you've also got sugar that you find in like foods, like for example, like milks and what else, like protein bars and different things like that. Like maybe if we could just talk about like what the difference is between those 3 types of sugars, or if there's more or less. Just then, because then we can kind of look at, like, I can definitely look at, like, I don't ever use sugar, like, for, like, teaspoon of sugar, unless I'm making cakes, which I don't do very often because I'm not a baker at all. But, like, I know that my family, like, I grew up having, like, 2 teaspoons of sugar in my tea. Like, we're Middle Eastern, we love sugar in tea. But I'm also very conscious of the fact that in my head, that just seems so wrong, because I'm like, oh, God, it's not natural, you know, like, I'm putting all of this not very good stuff into my body.
So I think sugar is really a field that we have been so conditioned to differentiate between processed sugar and natural sugar. So the one thing to keep in mind is sugar is sugar is sugar. Same thing. While there are different pathways and different ways of metabolizing different kinds, but sugar is sugar is sugar. So that is something to keep in mind. And so any word that ends on O's, O-S-E, is a sugar. Lactose, fructose, glucose, allulose, all that is sugar. Allulose, as a side note, is a sugar or is a derivative of fructose that behaves very differently, that I'll just talk about later. But so all these natural sugars in fruit, in coconuts, in all these things are just as good or bad as the sugar in Coca-Cola. To keep that in mind. So, and another thing is that when people say, but I can't live without sugar. Well, technically, sugar is not a food that we need to take in. Technically, not biologically, the liver produces the glucose we need from fat. So, but of course, any food that tastes nice has a little bit of sugar in it. So I think with sugar, it is realistically not a point that we can ever go to a place where we do not eat sugar. That is, I think that would be the end of humanity if we could not even have a blueberry. But I think it's very much the awareness which foods actually contain sugar, being that baked beans and ketchup and sauces and of course lovely natural things, a mango, is a sugar bomb. So to be aware of that, that is the first step. I think excluding refined sugars is probably, that is doable, because that's a choice we make. Tea and sugar, a Coca-Cola. Yes, there is something about Coca-Cola that seems to be so addictive that people cannot stop themselves. I would just say that's the one thing where I want to whack people on the head and to say, just don't do it. Because Coca-Cola, being that full fat, so with sugar or with aspartame, Coke Zero, or whatever it is, that's horrific shit. So that was.
I give you full permission to tap my husband on the head. He has like Coke Zeros a day, and he's going to kill me for saying this. And then I always say to him like, "Oh, it's such a waste of money, and it's not good for you, and it's just like it's literally a can of chemicals."
It is really not just a waste of money, it is a waste of brain, because the aspartame in Coke Zero or in Diet Coke, aspartame has been shown to decrease the size of the hippocampus, which are two small structures in the brain that are all about memory. So if I were you, I would just slap him every time and just say, it's with love and kindness, because it is his brain that you're saving. That's all I'm saying. So you
Yeah,
can get
that's
it.
it. Instead of like drinking the Coca-Cola, drink some water, and otherwise you're getting a tap on the head. Sorted. Plan of action.
I totally support that. Yeah, so it's very much being aware of where the sugar is, avoiding a few things, zero tolerance. And I must say, I have so much empathy for this process of excluding foods, because I've played this game and I know how hard it is. No question. But there are a few things that are not fit for human consumption. That is just destruction. So all these fizzy drinks and all that stuff, anything with aspartame. Aspartame is, of course, an artificial sweetener, but of course, that is in this whole sugar thing. So certain things, avoid. That is zero tolerance, avoid, force yourself. But with everything else, with natural sugars or even refined sugars in, if you make your own cake, there will be refined sugar or coconut sugar or something in there. And be aware of how much is in there and reduce. And only to be aware of the fact that tropical fruits contain humongous amounts of sugar. And unless you are a hardcore bodybuilder, eating a banana will spike your glucose and will essentially end up in around the hip, sadly. So that is really just something to keep in mind, and think about the substitutions that you can make. Tropical fruit with berries, for example. Berries are perfect in that they're very high in antioxidants, so which is an amazing nutrient. But also blueberries, resveratrol, perfect for the brain, and small amounts of sugar, still very tasty. So it's all about finding substitutions that do not make you feel deprived. Because I think as soon as we deprive ourselves of anything and everything, and we sit around the table and everybody eats idiotic things but tasty things, and you're the only one who's not allowed, that will create resentment, and that will be the end of anything. And what we want to do is to change one's habits long term and to make it sustainable, and to turn that into just second nature.
So I have a quick question. So obviously there's the whole 5 a day thing, which I know your thoughts on, which I'd love for you to talk about. But also at the same time, like, I find fruit a really easy snack because it's just like you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do any prep. And I'm rushing about all day and like having a banana for breakfast and then having some grapes at lunchtime or something else for me is better than stuffing my face with like a packaged snack. So basically, like, what would you recommend from a daily basis or a weekly basis? Maybe it's not a daily a kind of example of what we should be doing. Maybe it's a weekly example of what we like. I know everyone's different, so this is to kind of be taken with a pinch of salt in that sense. But like, I love bananas, I love grapes. I'm not a big fan of apples. I can have a pear occasionally. But I also know that I know we say like I don't eat enough fruit and vegetable, because we need the other elements of fruits and veg, not just the sugar. Is there kind of some guidelines that we could work from or to start from initially that we could focus on as we enter the new year, as we're trying to really change our habits from grabbing a kind of Rice Krispie bar off the side and instead we're like, okay, actually, I'm going to have a banana instead?
Yeah, so I think first of all, replacing any processed snack, sweetie food with a fresh fruit, it's a good start. But bananas, grapes, as you say, are incredibly high in sugar, just to keep that in mind. And as a side note, you just mentioned banana for breakfast. I would always avoid high sugar in the morning. So for breakfast, ideally high protein, high fat. And that would be a coconut yogurt with a few blueberries. So it doesn't have to be just a glass of olive oil. That would be healthy, but not super attractive for people, I think. So that, just to keep in mind, starting the day with something high sugar, that sets you up for the famous roller coaster of high glucose, and then you have the crash, and then you need a snack, and then you are up and down and constantly hyper and tired. And that is not great for your energy level, obviously, but terrible for your brain. And of course, that's the kind of shit that any sort of glucose and insulin dysregulation is really the route to insulin resistance, diabetes 2, and of course, the brain is my favorite subject. Diabetes 2 is a very big risk factor for diabetes 3, which is Alzheimer's. So I don't want to scare people into changing their nutrition, but actually to empower people to think like, it's my choice. And blueberries taste so much better than the banana, and the concept of having diabetes too later, which is not great. You're on mute.
I think that's what the podcast is all about, in a sense that we're re-educating ourselves in regards to what we can do now to prevent long-term health conditions in later life. So I know like this can feel and seem super overwhelming, all of this information, and the point is that we're not just all drastically doing it in January, but the fact that we're going to start to slowly introduce this into our daily habits, into our weekly habits, so that in the long term, over 10-year period, we started to regain that understanding, behavioral change that's required to optimize aging. And I know that's, for me, is exactly what I'm trying to achieve from this podcast. Is although I'm presenting it to people and trying to share it to the world and really re-educate, at the same time I'm learning so much because I want to live better, I want to make better choices. And I think from that fruit and veg, going back to that, in a sense of like understanding like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be having a banana, because at the moment I'm having a protein bar and a banana for breakfast. And then by the end of the day, I'm like super hungry. And I guess that like that spike in energy and that drop is affecting my hunger throughout the day. So it's like, now it's like, okay, now when I go to reach for that banana in the morning, I'm going to wait a little bit longer and opt in for something like, maybe I was going to ask about the coconut yogurt and fruit, because I'm not a big fan of coconut yogurt and I think it's a bit of an acquired taste. But would Greek yogurt be a good substitute?
If it is high fat, that's the most important thing. Organic, ideally. And if you tolerate dairy, it's fine. Many people don't actually tolerate dairy, and that is something that doesn't necessarily need to have a gut response, but it may be a skin response. So acne, for example, is highly correlated with a dairy intake, and that's casein in dairy. Or it may be the famous like puffiness that people have. It may be an inflammatory response that people have to dairy. If you don't have that, and of course, I think by now you're very, very aware of yourself and you're watching yourself. So if you don't have that, and if you have a high fat, organic, wonderful Greek yogurt with some berries, maybe some nuts, perfect start to the day, I would say. So the high fat, and of course, yogurt contains protein as well, and possibly an egg. If you like eggs for breakfast, eggs are the most perfect food in terms of the fat and protein intake. And eggs contain a nutrient called choline, which is amazingly supportive for the brain, for memory function, and certain vitamins that are in eggs. So sadly, I cannot eat eggs, but I'm always very enviously watching people having eggs for breakfast because it's the perfect start to the day, I would say.
Amazing. And like annoyingly, I mean not annoyingly, but I mean luckily I was able to do a blood test on my intolerances, and annoyingly egg whites have come up as something that I don't basically inflames my body. So I mean, I'm a big fan of egg yolk, and I know that there's lots of fantastic things in egg yolks, and not to be scared of them from a fat perspective, because I think maybe a few years ago there was this like whole thing like, don't eat egg yolks, it's full of cholesterol, you know, that thing, and it's like, no, it's good for you.
For the brain, yeah, exactly. And to your question around the 5 a day before, so I think the 5 a day is a it's very good to have those very simple guidelines so that people can actually stick to that. What you were saying before, sticking to one's own common sense, that's the perfect guideline. But the 5 a day, ideally, focus on low sugar fruit. You will have a few fruit in there, low sugar berries ideally, and ideally some dark green leafy vegetables. So that's classic rucola or kale, or these dark leafy vegetables, and cauliflower and broccoli. Incredibly good. And some root vegetables. So root vegetables are high in sugar usually, but incredibly tasty, of course, and incredibly healthy, and so very nutrient dense. So that is a very nice part of this 5 a day. The one thing to keep in mind is potatoes do not fit into there, because potatoes are just glucose bombs. So to think like, oh, French fries are part of my 5 a day, that I think we all know is just a lame excuse. And just as a side note, potatoes belong to the group of nightshades. So nightshades are plants that, if you look at them, or fruit, and they're all fruit, they look very diverse. So if you think tomatoes, bell peppers, white potatoes, I think acai, so various different things are considered nightshades. The one thing that they have in common is that at the top they have something that looks like a little hat. So that's how you can recognize these are nightshades. And the one thing that these nightshades have in common is a very specific kind of acid that has shown to be highly inflammatory, and especially for people that are susceptible to arthritis. So that is something for them to avoid, and that is really tomatoes is a huge thing that may be inflammatory. Again, watch yourself. If you eat tomatoes and you notice that your joints feel funny or something is not right, don't dismiss that. Don't ignore it. I think that's important. Most important thing. White potatoes are not part of your 5 a day. White potatoes are. But sweet potatoes are amazingly nutritious. So that is definitely something that I would suggest people to consider. Sweet potatoes, of course, as the name suggests, are quite high in sugar. But if you have them in small amounts, it's incredibly nutrient dense, very high in vitamin C. And they are something that is called a prebiotic. And we all have heard about probiotics, so that's really to support the gut flora. A prebiotic is a food that feeds those little microbes that live in our gut. So, and that is an important process, to be kind to those little guys that live in our gut, because they really drive our health, our mental health and physical health. And so sweet potatoes are, especially the lukewarm sweet potatoes, so that now is getting towards the eating for sustenance, not just for taste side of things. But it's a good thing just to know it and to be able to make choices. What makes you feel good.
Amazing. Thank you. That sounds, I mean, I used to love sweet potatoes. I was at university, and I think that's what I used to eat. And weirdly, I was so healthy at university. Like, you usually think, like, you go to university, you have microwave meals and you drink a lot of, but I was just I was more healthy then than I ever have been in my whole life. And I think that's just because I was so much more conscious of health at that time. And then as I've kind of had more of an income or more money to play with, it's easier to be like, I'm just going to have takeaway, or I'm going to buy like much more, and I don't have to worry about like what I'm buying as from a food perspective. And then also, I found from a mental perspective around food was I was so mindful about what I was putting into my mouth. Whereas now, I don't know why, but I'm not as mindful, and I'm much more careless. So I think we get into bad habits, and I think that that's what's happened to me. It's like my family I never grew up, and now they do, but we never grew up having takeaways, and my parents were so health conscious and fed us such nutritious, lovely, amazing, wholesome foods. And then I continued that through to university life, and then left university, met my husband, and he's been a bad habit on me ever since.
He drinks Coke Zero. That is.
He's gonna be like, "Why are you rinsing me on this podcast?" I love you, really, Sam. Yeah, no, but it's easy when you're in a couple, I think, and that's something that I kind of want to pinpoint is you're influenced. Yeah, you're influenced by other people's decisions and their eating habits and what their desires and stuff. And I think that's often we can say, like, before I was with my partner, I was in the best condition of my life, which I think is the case for a lot of people, because you don't have to think about feeding someone else, or you don't have that external influence of like, oh, do you want a chocolate? Or I've just gone out to buy some donuts or whatever it is. You don't have that. Whereas it is a lot harder, I think, when you're battling that external person or that voice. So sometimes I think it is a discussion that needs to be had around what you'd like to achieve as a couple. And we're both very health conscious. And I know that from January, we're on the same frame of mind of we want to do better. And everything I'm learning, I'm passing on to him. And as a result of that, hopefully we can support each other. But I think we're done there. And I think there's so much information that we can take from that. I think the last thing I wanted to kind of touch upon was when it comes to weight loss and how food can affect that. So I'm very much a person who doesn't believe in the scales and BMI, and I like to promote intuitive, healthy eating and not focusing on aesthetics or, as I said, the scales, because I think that we're very vulnerable to the impact that can have on mental health. So going from Christmas and eat overindulging, I think rather than focusing on the aesthetic point of view, let's all focus on the health point of view and the intuitive eating and listening to our bodies. And I think as a result, as a whole, we'll feel 100 million times better.
I couldn't agree more. And I think by having a focus on anti-inflammatory diet, the mental health improves, because anxiety and depression is an inflammatory state of the brain. So by not eating shit, we will not just physically feel better, we will mentally feel better. So that is probably my closing remark.
Statement. Perfect. Well, I just want to cover 7 points that we've mentioned in a really quick fire bullet pointing way. So drink filtered water and drink more of it. Protein increase, we need to focus on those natural sources of protein. Stop eating 3 hours before sleeping and focus on an 8-hour eating period. Don't eat what people tell you to. Sugar is sugar is sugar. Coca-Cola can damage your brain. And 5 a day is a mix of fruit and veg. And I think if we take those small pieces of information through to January, February, March, April 2024, it's going to be a really good way of improving our overall health. So when you're, instead of picking up a fizzy drink or something, maybe go and get some water instead. And instead of picking up that protein bar, what can we have? Maybe some scrambled eggs or something like that. So I think those things are going to really help me personally as I move forward. So that's brilliant. Thanks, Martina. And actually, if we wanted to find out about more from you specifically, I'm going to definitely tag all the links in the podcast notes down below, but feel free to shout your website out.
So my project that is all about brain health and Alzheimer's prevention, and the project is called viatitudehealth.com. So viattitudehealth.com, and there you can contact me with any of your wonderful questions as well.
My name's Rosaria Barreto, and thank you so much for listening to How to Age Well. If you've enjoyed the podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a review. Your feedback means so much and helps others to find out about how to age well.